Today, I will provide a brief report on the budgetary planning for the upcoming fiscal year. We are steadily progressing through the budget development process and are approximately 1 month away from presenting the superintendent's budget recommendation for tentative adoption. We formally launched the FY25 budget development process in December, publishing our calendar and reviewing some of the key budget inputs that are required to develop the forecast. In January, each board member provided insights on their budgetary priorities, and in that month's board meeting, we discussed the board's shared priorities around continuing strategic plan investments and evaluating opportunities to strengthen recruitment and retention through competitive compensation investments. On January 8th, the Georgia legislature went into session, and we have been monitoring the activity under the Gold Dome, as this body is responsible for passing the state budget, which is a critical funding source for school systems. Last month, in the February meeting of the board, I provided a report on activity from the legislative session impacting the upcoming FY25 budget. I would like to highlight for our community that all of the board reports that are regarding the FY25 budget development to date are available on the Financial Services webpage. And so that brings us to today's report, which will focus on providing an overview of funding availability based on the known information from the legislative session and consultation with our local representatives. Before I proceed further, I do want to remind the community of the 4 funds that the board takes action on annually. Per governmental accounting standards, we create distinct funds to allow tracking of revenues and expenditures for specific purposes. Annually, we present the superintendent's recommended budget across 4 aggregate funds in accordance with Board Policy DC. The first of the 4 funds is the general fund, which is the account used for our daily operations like salaries, instructional supplies, maintenance costs, etc. Next is the Special Revenue Fund. This fund accounts for grants given to Henry County schools for specific purposes, and is also the home where the financials associated with our nutrition and our before and after school enrichment program are housed. Next is the Capital Projects Fund, which allows for the separate tracking of revenues and expenditures related to the capital improvements authorized by this board. And finally, there's the Debt Service Fund, which captures the revenue and expenses associated with the long-term obligations or debt that is incurred to finance those capital projects. And with that context, today's report will focus on the general fund specifically. So at the top of the next slide, you can see our current fiscal year FY24 adopted revenues alongside the forecast of revenues for FY25, which will govern the period of July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2025. As we monitor the current legislative cycle and speak to our local tax representatives, we foresee an increase in revenue of $18.8 million between the FY24 and FY25 fiscal years. Of note is that we are forecasting that local revenues will have a higher contribution to the general fund overall, which will break the trend of prior years where state funding provides at least 50% of the revenue profile. Overall, we are anticipating a $4.6 million decline in funding from the state, which is driven by a number of factors outlined on the page. To start, the governor and the legislature have signaled intent to increase the state's teacher salary scale by $2,500, which should impact all state-funded certified staff. Accordingly, we anticipate receipt of approximately $7.8 million in funding to support this state mandate. However, the gains in state funding will be offset as we extend this mandated action to all certified staff within Henry County schools, even those that are not funded by the state. The next big driver of state revenue pertains to the proposed increases to the state health benefit program. The governor has proposed that the employer-paid share increase by $180 per employee per month for certified staff and $250 per employee per month for our classified staff, with these changes impacting certified staff for a full year and classified staff for a half year. We estimate that the state will provide $5.4 million to support the implementation of the change as it relates to the certified staff, but no state funding is provided for the increases that we will be responsible for related to the classified staff. In consideration of the impacts of the TRS change from 19.98% to 20.78%, and the funding the state provides for training and experience, we expect a net decrease in funds related to these two factors. On a positive note, we expect to see increases in categorical grants related to transportation, nursing, and a newly considered security grant that will be available for ongoing costs to have safety. We believe that these categorical grants will offset reductions that we expect in our equalization grant. As previewed in last month's report, we're expecting a significant increase in our local 5 mil share, which effectively reduces state earnings. While we don't have the final numbers from the state, we are anticipating up to $18.7 million in reduction in state funding for this alone, based on the fair share calculation. Turning our attention to local revenue sources, we are anticipating an increase of $23.4 million year over year, driven by an assumption of 4% growth of the local tax digest and continued strength in our interest earnings. And so understanding this revenue picture is important because it sets the constraints for expenditures annually and informs the basis for what investment recommendations the superintendent will be able to include in the proposed budget. So moving to the next slide, we've talked about the year-over-year growth of $18.8 million, but these funds will be consumed as we enact the proposed state mandates and advance priorities of the board. Starting with investments driven by the legislature, which is the first group of expenditures that you see listed on the slide. Implementing the state mandates around healthcare cost increases, TRS increases, and the teacher scale increases are estimated to result in new expenditures year over year of $18.4 million. The next group of expenditures outlines investments connected with this board's united priorities around investing in the strategic action plan and the staff members responsible for ensuring a high-quality, world-class education for students of Henry County. Regarding the compensation investments, we are presently modeling investments required to honor the step in the published salary scales and extend the teacher's salary scale to step 25, which would round out the recommendations stemming from the classification and compensation study that was completed in fiscal year 22. The $2,500 salary increase proposed by the governor has been modeled for all staff members that are paid from certified scales, and a 2% scale increase has been modeled for classified and administrative scales. And as a reminder to the Board of Education, the salary scale for teachers exceeds the state scale with an additional contribution of local funds of $7,318 per teacher. Targeted investments above the 2% have been modeled for bus drivers, paraprofessionals, clinic aides, elementary clerks, campus monitors, and school nutrition assistants to yield a $1 per hour increase for these job families. Analysis is ongoing to assess additional target investments that may be required as well. Additionally, investments of $4.6 million have been identified to ensure the staffing and resources needed for the year 4 of the strategic plan are available. Areas of note include investments around world language, orchestra, and computer science engineering tactics. The last grouping of expenditures totaling $7.7 million relates to critical investments to respond to local growth and inflation to ensure we can provide the services and supports needed for our students. The total of the prioritized investments is $41.8 million, which exceeds the revenue growth of $18.8 million by $23 million. And thus, it will require use of reserves to accomplish these investment objectives. However, this board has proactively invested in the reserves to, first of all, manage the intake of the investments that were paid for by ESSER funds, which are expiring next year. And those costs have been being paid with ESSER for the past 3 years. And so you've been planning to take in that cost into the general fund. And secondarily, this board has invested so that we could be in a position to respond to revenue decline risk using the reserves and continuing to be a stable employer within this community. So while we are anticipating use of reserves to balance the FY25 budget, this board is well positioned to do so in alignment with policy DCO. I'll conclude with a review of some key timelines within the budget calendar. We anticipate presenting a tentative budget and holding the first of 2 required budget hearings on April 15th, 2024. The second budget hearing and final budget adoption is planned for May 13th, 2024. Dr. Knowlton, that concludes what I've prepared, and I yield the floor to you.